The money in your wallet is not wealth, it's paper. Paper that once promised gold, but now promises nothing. And this is no accident. This is the largest financial operation in human history. An operation carried out right before your eyes, designed so you wouldn't notice a thing. This is the financial historian, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it seems. For thousands of years, gold was the only real currency. Empires rose and fell, rulers came and went, but gold remained. It couldn't be printed. It couldn't be created out of thin air. It had to be extracted from the earth, ounce by ounce, ton by ton. And that's precisely why it kept power in check. But in 1971, everything changed. U.S. President Richard Nixon appeared on television and announced that the dollar would no longer be exchangeable for gold. He called it a temporary measure. More than 50 years have passed. The measure is still in place. And here's what no one will tell you. This wasn't an economic crisis. It was a coup, the quietest and most successful coup in financial history. A coup that transferred control over your money from the hands of nature into the hands of those who print paper. But to understand why this happened and what it means for you today, we need to go back in time, to where gold first became money, and to where power first realized that gold was its greatest enemy. Picture ancient Rome at the height of its power. Legions march from Britain to Persia. Roads connect the empire. Trade flourishes. And at the foundation of it all, the gold aureus and the silver denarius, coins that the entire known world trusted. But empires are expensive. Armies must be paid. Borders must be defended. Elites demand luxury. And sooner or later, the gold runs short. What does a government do when it runs out of money but can't print more? It starts cheating. Roman emperors, one after another, reduced the silver content in the denarius. Under Nero, the coin contained about 90% silver. By the 3rd century, less than 5%. This was inflation disguised as minting. Notice the pattern? Power cannot resist the temptation to dilute money. It did this 2,000 years ago. It does this today. Only the methods have changed. The consequences for Rome were catastrophic. Prices soared. Trade collapsed. Peasants refused to sell crops for debased coins. Armies demanded payment in physical goods. The empire that ruled the world crumbled from within. Not from barbarians at the gates, but from fake money in people's pockets. Here's the first lesson history is trying to teach you. When money loses its connection to real value, society begins to collapse. Slowly, invisibly, but inevitably. Let's jump forward 1,500 years. Europe emerges from the Middle Ages. Nation-states arise, and with them, the first central banks. In 1694, the Bank of England was created. The official purpose, to finance the war with France. The real purpose, to create a system where the government could borrow from the future. The bank issued paper money backed by gold in its vaults. People accepted the paper because they believed they could walk in at any moment and exchange it for real metal. It was a brilliant compromise. The convenience of paper with the reliability of gold. But it had one problem. For governments, they couldn't print more paper than they had gold. Gold was a chain that shackled their ambitions. And this is where the real story begins. The story of how that chain was broken, link by link, crisis by crisis, war by war. In 1871, the world adopted the classical gold standard. The British pound, the German mark, the French franc, the American dollar, all were pegged to a fixed amount of gold. You could exchange paper for metal at any bank in any major country. It was an era of stability. Inflation was virtually zero. International trade flourished. A worker could save money his entire life knowing it would hold its value. Your great-grandfather lived in a world where $100 in 1900 bought roughly the same as $100 in 1871. But here's the paradox. It was precisely this stability that became a threat to those who wanted power without limits. 1914. World War I begins. And within the first weeks, the gold standard collapses. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. War costs money, enormous amounts of money. More than any government can raise through taxes. More gold than any government possesses. And when the British, Germans, and French realized they would have to choose between the gold standard and war, they chose war. One by one, governments suspended the exchange of paper for gold. They began printing money to finance the slaughter. Over 4 years of war, the money supply in the belligerent countries multiplied several times over. Prices skyrocketed. Savings were wiped out. Millions lost everything their families had saved for generations. Here's what your history textbooks don't tell you. World War I was only possible because governments freed themselves from the golden chains. Without the ability to print money out of thin air, the war would have ended within months, simply because no one could have afforded to pay for it. The gold standard wasn't just a financial system. It was a restraining mechanism against the madness of power, and when it was removed, the madness was unleashed. After the war, the world tried to return to gold. In the 1920s, Britain, France, and Germany restored the convertibility of their currencies. But the system was already poisoned. Too much paper had been printed. Too much debt had accumulated. There simply wasn't enough gold to back all the promises. And then came 1929. The Great Depression still sparks debates among economists. Some blame the gold standard, others blame its improper implementation. But here's what's undeniable. The crisis gave governments the perfect excuse for a final break with gold. In 1933, new U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt did the unthinkable. He made it illegal for Americans to own gold. Yes, you heard that right. The government of the land of the free confiscated gold from its own citizens. Executive Order 6102 required all Americans to surrender their gold, coins, bullion, certificates to the Federal Reserve. In exchange, they received paper dollars at a rate of $20.67 per ounce. Those who refuse face 10 years in prison and a fine of $10,000. And here's the interesting part. After the government collected the gold from the population, it changed the exchange rate. An ounce of gold was now worth $35. With a single stroke of the pen, the government devalued every American savings by nearly 40%. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is historical fact. This was a law that remained in effect in the United States until 1974. For 41 years, Americans were forbidden from owning gold in their own country. Think about this for a second. If gold is just a barbarous relic, as economists called it, why was the government so afraid of citizens holding it? Why threaten prison for possessing a metal? The answer is simple. Because gold is freedom. Freedom from control. Freedom from inflation. Freedom from the arbitrary decisions of those who print money. And the freedom had to be taken away. After World War II, the world created a new financial system. In 1944, in the American town of Bretton Woods, representatives of 44 countries agreed on the rules of the game. The dollar would become the world's reserve currency. All other currencies would be pegged to the dollar, and the dollar would be pegged to gold, $35 per ounce. But there was one crucial detail. Only foreign governments could exchange dollars for gold. Ordinary citizens could not. It was a half-measure system. Gold still anchored the dollar, but the chain had grown longer. The American government could print more dollars than it had gold, as long as other countries believed in the promises. And for 25 years, the system worked. The U.S. financed Europe's recovery, Japan's economic miracle, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the space program, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. Where did the money come from? The printing press. Dollars flowed around the world like a river. And gradually, other countries began to notice that there were more and more promises, but no more gold. In the late 60s, French President Charles de Gaulle openly challenged American hegemony. He sent ships loaded with dollars across the Atlantic and demanded gold in exchange. Other countries followed his lead. By 1971, U.S. gold reserves had shrunk from over 20,000 tons to less than 9,000. The world was demanding gold, and America couldn't deliver. The system was cracking at the seams. And then Nixon did what he did. On August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon appeared on television and delivered a speech that changed history. He announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold, temporarily. That word was repeated again and again. A temporary measure, an emergency situation, protection against speculators. But here's what was hidden behind the beautiful words. It was a default. America refused to pay its obligations. For decades, the government had promised foreign creditors that their dollars could be exchanged for gold. And in one day, that promise was broken. If an ordinary company had done this, its directors would have been sent to prison. If a small country had done this, it would have faced sanctions. But this was America, the world's most powerful economy, owner of the largest military, master of the reserve currency. And the world swallowed it. It had no choice. The uncomfortable truth is that, after August 15th, 1971, all money in the world became fictional. The dollar no longer promised anything but itself. The euro, the yen, the pound, all are pegged to a dollar that is pegged to nothing. Your savings are not wealth. They are a government promise, a promise that has already been broken once and can be broken again at any moment. But here's the paradox that makes you think. Why didn't the world collapse after the gold standard was abolished? Why does the economy keep functioning? Why do people still accept paper money? The answer is one word: trust. The modern financial system rests entirely on faith. Faith that governments will responsibly manage the money supply. Faith that central banks know what they're doing. Faith that tomorrow your money will be worth roughly what it's worth today. But here's what's actually happening. Since 1971, the dollar has lost more than 90% of its purchasing power. What your parents could buy for $100 now costs over $600. This isn't inflation, it's hidden theft. Every year, when the government prints new money, your savings lose value. You don't see yourself being robbed. You just see prices rising and think it's normal. But it's not normal. It's a mechanism for redistributing wealth, from those who hold money to those who print it and receive it first. Economists call this the inflation tax. A tax no one votes for. A tax you pay even if you have no income. A tax impossible to avoid as long as you hold money in paper currency. And here's where it gets interesting. If abolishing the gold standard was such a disaster for ordinary people, why hasn't anyone restored it? Why hasn't a single government in 50 years even tried to return to gold? Because the system works. It doesn't work for you. It works for those who control it. Without the gold standard, governments gained unlimited power over money. They can print as much as they want. They can finance any wars, any programs, any bank bailouts, without asking taxpayers for permission. When the financial system was on the brink of collapse in 2008, the Federal Reserve created over $4 trillion out of thin air. When the pandemic hit in 2020, another $6 trillion was printed. The money appeared instantly, without gold, without backing, without limits. Where did this money go? Most of it into financial markets. Stock prices soared to the sky. Real estate prices became unaffordable for young families. The rich got richer. And ordinary people found that their salaries bought less and less. This is not an accident. This is the design of the system. A system where money can be created from nothing inevitably redistributes wealth from workers to asset owners, from the young to the old, from the poor to the rich. The gold standard interfered with this redistribution. It forced governments to live within their means. It protected ordinary people's savings. It limited the ability of elites to manipulate the economy in their favor. That's why it was destroyed. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well for those who weren't supposed to benefit from it. But the story doesn't end there, because even now, half a century after Nixon's temporary measure, gold hasn't gone anywhere. The world's central banks continue to accumulate gold. The U.S. stores over 8,000 tons in Fort Knox. Germany, Italy, France, thousands of tons each. Russia and China have been actively buying gold for the last 20 years, building up their reserves. Ask yourself a question. If gold is a useless relic, why do governments keep it? Why haven't central banks sold it and invested in modern assets? Because they know what they're hiding from you. Paper money comes and goes. Empires crumble. Currencies lose value. But gold remains. It survived the fall of Rome. It survived the Middle Ages. It survived every war and revolution. And it will survive the current system. Those who rule the world are preparing for this. The question is, are you? So what does all this mean for you today? First, understand that the money in your wallet is not wealth. It's a promise that depreciates every day. Keeping your savings in paper currency means slowly losing them. Second, realize that inflation is not a natural phenomenon. It's a political choice. Every time the government prints money, it steals from you. Not directly, not through taxes, through the invisible devaluation of what you already have. Third, study history. Every empire, every state, every currency that abandoned gold backing eventually collapsed. Rome, Byzantium, Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. The list is endless. The current system is no exception. The question is not whether it will collapse, but when. Fourth, think about protection. History shows that those who survive are those who own real assets, land, commodities, precious metals. Assets that cannot be printed, cannot be confiscated with the push of a button, cannot be devalued with the stroke of a pen. And finally, understand the main point. If you understand these mechanisms, you are harder to manipulate. Financial education is not just knowledge, it's resistance. Resistance to a system that counts on your ignorance. Most people never think about what money really is. They work, earn their salaries, spend and save, without understanding that the rules of the game changed long ago, that the system they live in was designed not for their well-being, but for the well-being of those who control it. But now you know more. You know that the gold standard wasn't destroyed because it was outdated, but because it stood in the way of power. You know that paper money is a tool of control, not a store of value. You know that history repeats itself, and those who ignore it become its victims. History doesn't repeat exactly, but if you don't understand it, it will crush you just the same as everyone else. If this video gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.